Okay. So I've called this, rather than a literature review, I'm calling it a contextual review. And it's as a way of kind of contextualizing your research. Last week, Lyndall demonstrated methodology and methods for her own practice. And it was clear that there was no kind of single way of going about this. And I suppose the same is true with the literature or the contextual review. You'll unlike the social sciences or other kinds of research, there is no one single way of doing this. And I think Richard demonstrated that in his talk. I've used a couple of references here, and a lot of the references I've noticed in creative research or artistic research use the idea of journeys as analogies to kind of describing that process. And these two they refer to the creative practice as to forge a path through what may be unknown terrain or mapping the terrain. So as Lyndall reminded you last week, I use a lot of walking in my methodology. So I'm going to take you on a walk today. And the walk I'm going to take you on is it's the longest walk I've ever done. And I want you to look at that analogy with the research or with the PhD. This is one of the most remote parts of the world, and it was one of the longest ones. It was 100 kilometers, and I knew the beginning. I knew what was at the beginning, and I knew there was an end to it. And there was a track. It was in some places there was a slightly worn track, but mainly it was kind of untracked ground. And I was prepared for this journey. I've done many journeys before, many walks, and so I knew how to prepare myself. Having done that in the past, so I knew what kind of equipment to bring, how much food to take, and all of that. But what I didn't know was what happened in between, the point between the beginning and the end. So in your project, when you start your project, you basically need to demonstrate that you know your field. And this is your own field or your own context for your project. And this means more than simply reporting what you've seen, read, or heard. You need to read, look, and listen critically. And this shows the kind of feel you've got for your area, what is most relevant to your project, and where it's going. It allows you to map your field and position your research within its context. And this will vary, everybody will have their own field and their own context. The contextual review shows that you're aware of the traditions and history and the current status of the field. And it is your field. Again, I'll just reiterate this, it's specific to your project, and it gives your project its justification. I've used two kind of references for this talk. One is for a couple of British writers, Carol Gray and the other person, and the other is a group of from Finland. And I suppose in some ways Finland has been leading the way in regards to artistic research. So you start off, you've already got, so the research like my work is a starting point from what is known and what you know to what is unknown. So you start off with something that's familiar to you, your own practice, and step into an unfamiliar world or an unfamiliar terrain. So you have a practice already of one kind or another, whether it be art or creative working, fashion, and you know what to do to get results. You're well practiced at that, it's why you're here. And you have a way of making that's familiar to you and even comfortable. But research is a way of taking what you know and do and setting off on a journey where you don't know the destination. And at this point, it's not even imaginable. However, you do start with your own practice and let the practice guide the thinking. So, it's really just to keep locating the research within your own practice. This is what's going to generate the inquiry and generate the knowledge. So, although I'm well informed before my walks and before I set off and do a lot of research, and because I've made so many walks before, there are the unknown factors. And this is an image from a magazine, which was kind of talked about the walk I was going on. And this image gave me sleepless nights, I have to say. I can't tell you, just every night I went to bed and thought, oh my God, you know, who was holding that rope? And how would I ever cross such rivers? How would I cope with this? But it wasn't until you actually get there and start to kind of try those things out that you know that you'll do it. But this was what kind of was awaiting me. So by gathering enough information and references, you can start to articulate what it is that you have a curiosity about. So what do you want to find out? I've deliberately said insights here. There's a lot of, although you kind of develop questions through your research, we're not really looking for answers. And in fact, creative projects often throw up more questions than answers. So often what you'll end up with is a new insight or an insight into something. So don't be looking for answers. So in other disciplines, the literature review means just that. You know, what is in the established literature in books, journals, and conference proceedings. But I like this quote by Hanula, who says, "Nothing is alien to artistic research. Its theoretical and empirical research objects can include the rich world sliding from high art to popular culture, including performances, films, posters, animations, tabloids. So everything that's perceived as representing and presenting the reality in which people live and which they produce through their own actions." So when you start, you may start to fill in the kind of the background. So you'll have some idea of the kind of a general feel of your field and its scope. And your starting point will come out of previous work. But it's important that you start to widen the scope. So to look beyond what you know already into the unknown. So this was our first campsite. And we were told to spread our belongings about. So this was because of polar bears. So we made sure we slept in one part, we cooked in another, and we kept our food somewhere else. So this is a way of kind of diversifying our project in a way. So, but altogether, it kind of comes together to be the part of the same thing. So although your references may appear unrelated, through critical analysis, and this is where your kind of analytical skills come in, you can bring them together to support your proposal. Excuse me. So you can start, you can kind of take these resources. I've got ready research data, it can kind of come from anywhere, from the everyday world, from the established literature, from art and artists, from all kind of sources. However, what is critical is how you analyze that and interpret the material that you're going to use. And in order to do this, you have to read and experience it. So at this point, when you're kind of developing this contextual review or finding a context for your project, it's really important to just keep making the work. Don't stop making work, because that's going to generate the sort of thinking that you need. And so anybody can learn the descriptive reporting, but conceptualizing it requires something else. Something other than strong muscles and in the neck and shoulders. There must be something above them. So you need to apply some intelligent critical thinking. And you also need to be able, one of those ways is to take something that exists already and turn it into something else. So interpret it in new ways. And sometimes you'll find familiar and unfamiliar material together. And through interpretation, it's the way you kind of interpret that material where you can bring it together to have meaning for you and to be relevant for your project. And images also need some kind of interpretation. Although you might feel quite comfortable with a lot of the images that you use, in the context of your project, you need to be able to kind of analyze those, be critical of them, and the way that you incorporate them. So as a way of making a start, you may start with just lists of people who interest you, books and literature, but you need to do more than this. So what we don't want is not a simple list of artists, practitioners, and nor is it a voluminous bibliography. So you can't leave your references just as a listing or an outline. There needs to be some fleshing out or interpretation. So, you know, you need a lot more than just that kind of skin of an idea. You need to really flesh it out through your own kind of interpretation. So basically, there needs to be substance to your contextual review. And your references may have had other lives, but what is important is your use and your interpretation of them. So it's a way of, you know, you having your very particular take on your material. Also, remember, you're not alone. So although you're bringing this material together, you do have a supervisor to work with and who will kind of take you on your journey. However, supervisors also come with their own baggage and ideas about what your research is. So, and it might differ from yours, and the context, and it may unintentionally put you off on the wrong track. So one of the good things about the contextual review is that you can set out your project and be able to demonstrate it, as opposed to the project that your supervisor thinks you're doing. And there's also, you may get help from peers or friends, the kind of the community of practice. These are often people who know a bit more than you, or who have kind of similar ideas and similar interests. And sometimes your supervisor might give you something that they believe to be useful, and you need to know how to distinguish between what's useful and what's not. What is going to be valuable for your own research. And in this instance, keywords are really important. And those of us in the School of Art, we did a session last week with the librarian, which I think was very useful into the way that keywords can really help you find what you need. But without the appropriate references, it's very hard to determine how big or how far you're going. So, this was... I realised when I was on this particular walk, there are no trees. There's nothing kind of a human scale. And so it's very difficult to work out, how far away this rock was across the river or how tall it was. And so the contextual review will help you to define the parameters of your project. And also, remember, it's not your life's work. It's just a particular project in a continuum. So it's a sustained project for a certain length of time, but it has to have, a beginning and an end. So be realistic about what you can achieve in and for your field. And it could be, even if you're drawing on information in astrophysics, for example, you most likely will not be making a contribution to that field. So, be realistic about where your contribution lies. We're told when we're crossing rivers, raging rivers, to not go for the smooth water. The smooth water holds dangers of great depth. So to go for the turbulent water where you perhaps can see some kind of bottom there. So it doesn't mean that you don't seek out references from other disciplines. You can do that, but make sure set yourself projects of getting your references from as many disciplines as possible, but don't go for the easy ones, I suppose. And learn how to manage your information. So it's important that you kind of establish systems that allow you to organise hard and soft information, so you don't end up continually chasing the same information or looking for those references once more. So try and keep all your information together in one place. Don't scatter it around, and make sure you can read your own notes. Because that's another thing. Again, try and have some kind of method to your contextual review. Carol Gray, in this instance, uses the analogy of a river to represent an argument for the research. So she calls it a moving force with a strong direction. Usually starting from a small spring, which is the speculative idea that you have this kind of hunch or a kind of a niggle. And on the way to being expanded and shaped by diverse contributions from tributaries, or this is the other relevant research, until eventually flowing confidently into a sea of knowledge. So within this flow of references, and they may be incorporated in various ways. So again, it's the way you put this material together. So it can be chronologically, if you're looking at developments over time. It can be thematically, or you might make connections between previously unrelated research. And that's where it kind of becomes interesting in a way. But make sure your project is something you feel very strongly about. It has to sustain you for 2 years of an MFA or up to 4 years of a PhD. And this is quite a nice quote by Hanula about, strongly linked to you being in the world, so that you are a person, you are the agency of your own research. So that you're not studying something, but studying with it. I think Richard touched on this as well. So it isn't something that exists outside of you or separate from you. It actually is, it becomes a part of you. It's something that you feel very, very strongly about. So, and just to recap and reiterate, I suppose this is what the contextual view enables you to do. It enables you to take real possession of your project and your field of research. And so by the end, you'll have left your supervisor way behind. The idea is that you become an expert in your own field. You've gained a certain knowledge by bringing in this particular interests of your own in relation to the work you're making. So you kind of do that overtaking thing. You may not look very happy about it. And just to continue with this, just to show you some more pictures. And eventually the mists will clear, the whole thing will become a lot clearer. You'll cross that line and look a lot happier, and be able to reflect on what you've done. Look at it as a reflection until you both kind of sail away with a happily completed project. Thanks.